Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reset, Taliesin and Evertel's Wondrous Wisdom Show. And first of all, yes, I'm sorry this episode is a little bit later than we'd usually aim for, but it was Evertel's birthday. Gotta do the birthday stuff, haven't you? Gotta get the birthday treats. Wine, I'm talking about wine. But in a week where we now know what player housing is in World of Warcraft, we know what it isn't, and we know specifically what other game it has kind of based its design philosophy on, and which game's lunch it is well and truly setting out to eat. And it's Final Fantasy XIV's lunch they want to eat, that yummy 14 lunch, yum yum yum. And of course, we talked about this news at length on the podcast last week, but it's nice to do it on the Weekly Reset too, isn't it? With the script and the lovely suit jacket and the table and stuff. But that's not all, because there's also things in the much closer future to look forward to as well, namely the new patch 11.1. Undermined, which at the time of writing still doesn't have a release date, even though the current build is a release candidate, even though they literally just put out a Nixium video on their official channel talking all about it, but which surely will get announced this week, right? I mean, it has to, right? Chances are it will have happened before this video is edited and published, probably about 5 minutes before the episode is edited and published. Oh, look at that, not 5 minutes after the video was published, a couple of hours before, so luckily I can tell you that yes, it's official. Patch 11.1 Undermined goes live on the 26th of February, which is also when Plunderstorm ends, by the way, with a new zone and campaign quests. Car, of course. Start on your cartel Renown, play some new delves, use the new PvP arena. Okay, you can use it, I'm fine. Put your warband on the new screens, and get ready for Season 2 to start on the 5th of March. Normal, heroic, and mythic difficulty all launching at the same time for the liberation of Undermine, and the first wing of Raid Finder too, with story mode coming in week 2 of the season on the 12th of March, so everyone will be able to defeat Gallywix and see whatever cutscene or end cinematic there is in just the second week. Kinda cool. So with what may be our last PTR update for Undermined, here's Evertel with a rundown of what got added this week.
It's time for Evie's PTR rundown. Let's run down. And I'm sorry it's a bit late this week, but it was my birthday. Birthday treats, you know? This week we got music. One of my personal favorite parts of any new PTR additions. This is when a zone really starts to feel like itself, in my opinion. And there's a case to be made for the Undermine music being the most unique in the whole of WoW. Like, have you ever thought, I really like WoW music, but I just think it could use a little more saxophone? Well, shit, have I got good news for you. Soundtrack is the sleazy jazz and Prohibition-era swing and big band-inspired noise that we all knew the Goblin capital needed, but kind of secretly doubted Blizz would have the guts to allow. Here's the music that plays when you're doing jobs for Nanny Tallulah in your hot rod.
It's go time, sugar. Let's make a buck.
By the way, the footage there with the green arrow above your car is the shipping and handling quest, where you can just drive around completing little challenges that are given to you over the radio by Nanny Tallulah, GTA style, and which is basically infinitely repeatable, except that every 10 quests you have to stop and drink a cocktail as part of your legally mandated break. The raid music is that, but more fighty. just a big yes from me. This zone is thematically the most distinctive of any major patch zone in the game. It's got so much character and charm and humor and love poured into it. There's just so much fun here. I love it. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned the raid though, because the Liberation of Undermine Renown track that we've talked about before has been altered this week to include 2 new mounts as part of its rewards. The Thunder Drum Misfire is the prize for reaching Raid Renown 8 and is a red variant of the new rocket mounts that are available in a range of other colors this patch, and further solidifies my belief that this entire update should probably be called 11.1 Undermined, sponsored by Wowhead. And the level 17 reward is the Dark Fuse Chompactor, a red and black variant of the armored hyena style mount that is another mainstay of 11.1 rewards. And that's good because until now, Renown level 17 didn't even have a reward, apart from the puzzling cartel chip, which was the dinar type item that would allow players to choose any item of raid loot from a vendor. But don't worry, because the level 17 puzzling cartel chip and the second level 19 one have been moved to Renown level, not. Renown level, no, they're gone. The most desirable player power rewards on the tree are gone. But hey, you get 2 mounts instead, and mounts are cool, right? We all love mounts. You know where they really love mounts? On the forums, where this news was met with celebration and praise for Blizz, replacing a boring old item that lets you choose any item of loot that you want. Oh. With a recolored hyena with armor, everyone agreed the hyena's armor was much cooler than the player armor they could be getting, and stocks in Activision Blizzard went up 2 bajillion% as players rushed to show their appreciation for another. No, it was a shit show, obviously.
Blizz just doesn't listen and doesn't learn. Huge L. Congratulations, you lost Dinars and gained 2 more fishy mounts. Giga L from Indie Company. Sick, another patch to sit out. These rewards are childish trash. Blizzard must really want to kill mythic raiding. Like there's no other explanation for such a change. Insanely massive L.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's perfectly reasonable and expected that players would be upset about the cartel chips being removed from the Renown tree because they were a top tier reward that was being made available to basically everyone, if those rewards weren't being moved to a different source. But surely they will be moved to another source, right? And that's a good question, which was answered within a couple of hours by a blue post which clarified. It's noteworthy that this feature isn't intended to be gone from the Undermined update entirely, just that they're moving away from the 11.1 Raid Renown track. More details to come, so hang tight and we'll have more to say on what's becoming of them soon. Oh, okay then. At the time of writing, we don't know what that new source is, or whether there will still be 2 available, or whether it will still be basically just a raid reward or through other forms of content, but 11.1 will be the first mainline WoW season that gives players dinars for loot. There was criticism that having the cartel chips be awarded at 17 and 19 weeks into the raid were way too late anyway, even for what is obviously intended to be bad luck protection, so Blizz can easily make this whole story a huge win for everyone by making the new way of getting these things happen a bit earlier on in the season, and I hope they do that. Hey, do you want to hear some more of that Undermine music?
And now it is time to talk about player housing, because just under a week ago, Blizzard revealed, probably a bit earlier than anyone expected, their plan for the basic shape and philosophy of player housing in World of Warcraft. Player housing that will be here in the game before the end of the year, which is still completely wild to me whenever I think about it. We know what the feature is and what it isn't, and I think that is worthy of some analysis. So, what is it? It's neighborhoods. Players will be getting their Mr. Rogers on with 2 new dedicated zones, one for Alliance based thematically on Elwyn Forest with hints of Westfall and Duskwood, one for Horde with Barrens and Ashara vibes. We don't know if these zones will be physical places on the map that you can fly over and enter freely as if they were delves or garrisons, or something you'll have to zone into separately. But I mean, they've got that delve tech, so I'm guessing there'll be real physical zones. I'm guessing here and here. And these zones are just for housing with around 50 properties in each shard. So when you have your house in one of them, you'll have set neighbors in the long term, which is obviously very much based on the Final Fantasy XIV model for housing and not the Elder Scrolls Online version. A huge shock to me, and which means for now that WoW housing is not your chance to have a home in your favorite zone, unless one of these 2 new zones just happens to be your favorite zone, which would be really lucky, frankly, wouldn't it? So, no Stormwind or Suramar apartment for you, no Grizzly Hills log cabin for you. All player housing for the foreseeable future, and more on that later, will be purely in these 2 new zones. I have to say, if you're gonna copy a player housing system, it is a bold move to directly open yourself to comparison with the MMO that basically stole your girlfriend during Shadowlands. Especially as it would be a huge shock if WoW housing was anything like as customizable as 14's from a building perspective. I don't think anyone expects WoW to be able to have free-form 3D modeling like that game has, and especially as WoW's version will inevitably launch with a whole bunch less options than 14's system, which has had 12 years of additions and updates behind it now. You might even call it a foolish move, because how can WoW possibly compete with that? Isn't this like a really terrible fight to pick? Well, maybe not, because Blizz looks set to avoid the very real and obvious problems with Final Fantasy XIV's player housing system, the absurd scarcity. Even if you've never played that game in your entire life, and you should, it's good, you probably know that player housing in 14 is incredibly difficult to come by, being designated by lottery, being very expensive, and as a result of those things, players potentially losing their property if their account is inactive for too long. No such problems in the WoW neighborhoods. Everyone will get a home for free or for negligible gold outlay, and they will never lose that property in the same way that you just would never lose your garrison. That's twice I've said garrison now. Which seems like a pretty low bar, doesn't it? But genuinely, all of that is a massive problem in Final Fantasy XIV, and so this could be interpreted as coming for Final Fantasy XIV's launch in a very big way. And with Blizzard basically removing all of the disadvantages of this system in mind, what are the advantages of this kind of housing model over, say, an ESO style thing? Well, mostly the social side. Blizzard have said that a key pillar of their design philosophy with housing is that it is a social activity. And yeah, I would say that neighborhoods are perfect for that. Every time you walk out of your front door, the same player has their house next door. The same house with that weird roof that they got from a rare achievement is on the top of the hill. You see the same players in the streets as you make your way to, well, more on that later. But it gives you a chance for a social familiarity and a purpose that has always been my favorite thing about 14 housing. It probably means that this system is not WildStar or Guild Wars 2 in the way that those games let you literally build your house from scratch and mold it and form it to make it look like whatever you want. Probably. We don't know. But 14 neighborhoods have set houses in set locations in the zone. I think it's most likely that once you are given or you have chosen your plot, you'll have a smallish number of options for the exterior model of the home you want to use. Maybe you'll be able to change the roof or the wall color or whatever, and all basically in keeping with the theme of the neighborhood, so kind of human or kind of orky, but not freeform, probably. But this is also not limited to those public versions of the zones, because another thing that WoW's planned lack of scarcity will let it do that 14 can't is have the option of private neighborhoods for groups of friends or for guildies. And if you aren't suddenly extremely excited about the thought of guild neighborhoods right now, or Blizzard community neighborhoods, or like streamer community neighborhoods there, but mostly guild neighborhoods, like if you are not sitting right up in your seat right now, if your heart is not beating just a little bit faster, then I simply do not know how to please you anymore. I'm sorry. We'll take a look forward at all of the potential amazing things that Blizzard can do with this in a minute. But first, more stuff this feature is. It is microtransactions. This isn't a surprise, is it? But Blizz have, rather wisely, I think, said straight off the bat that an element of this will be monetized. There will be the occasional housing item or bundle on the store. They compare it to the way mounts appear on it now. So, well, not that occasional then really, is it? But also, I guess you can infer that to mean that the vast majority of housing stuff will appear in-game, but the shop stuff has the potential to be more unique, less connected to the in-game themes of the current patch or raid or zones or whatever. This is inevitable, and you know I dislike the shop on principle, okay? But it does remain the case that Blizz is slightly unique among the biggest MMOs and compares very favorably to them, in that you genuinely can buy anything on the store with in-game gold. Nothing is exclusively locked behind you needing to spend real money. It's not an offense to the store, it's just a statement of fact. And the main reason I much prefer WoW's real money purchases over, say, Final Fantasy XIV or ESO. God, especially ESO. It is not currently a new profession. Blizz made no mention of how professions will interact with the new player housing system, but I mean, it surely will. In like a very big way. That is, after all, one of the main reasons to have a player housing system, in my opinion. Sorry to keep bringing up Final Fantasy XIV, you know, but this thing is based on that system, so it makes sense. But in that game, there are tons of stuff that you can buy on the auction house that other players have made. Furniture and ornaments and wallpaper and ceiling tiles and whatever else. And whereas I would be surprised if WoW has anything like that breadth of options initially, it is a no-brainer to have a substantial amount of interior options be crafted items, and it would certainly make sense to introduce a new profession into the mix as well, wouldn't it? I mean, blacksmithing, leatherworking, and tailoring all have pretty obvious things that they can contribute. Gates, or drapes, and tablecloths, and weapon racks and stuff. Inscription could make dyes that are used in creating those things. Enchanting and alchemy, likewise, mostly an ingredient-making thing where housing stuff is concerned. But surely, the game will be crying out for some kind of woodworking profession to be added? To make those chairs and tables and bed frames and window panes and other basic in-home items. You could even make a new gathering profession out of it, because those woodworkers are going to need wood, and that means cutting down trees, surely. WoW player housing is account-wide and essentially cross-faction. Although only Alliance players can own a house in the Alliance zones and Horde players in the Horde zones, there are no restrictions on visiting or staying in these homes. So your Alliance characters can freely visit your Horde friends' houses and indeed your own Horde alts' houses, where Blizz says that your warband will be able to use each other's homes as if they were their own, regardless of those faction divides, which might answer a question that you had about those community and guild neighborhoods we were talking about, yeah? This is not garrisons, obviously. But honestly, I don't blame people if this blue post makes people think of garrisons a little bit. The limit to Horde and Alliance zones, the subsequent very human vibe of the Alliance neighborhood and very orc vibe of the Horde one is probably a little bit more reminiscent of garrisons than anyone would have expected. And if you are a big elf or goblin or gnome or Forsaken enjoyer, I don't blame you for being a little bit worried right now that you're going to be forced into a certain aesthetic or style, completely detached from your own race fantasy, just like you were in your garrison. I think that's probably a fair worry, and not one that Blizz have properly addressed yet, in my opinion. Folk and rugged were the two styles of decor shown in the Bloom post, and they are functionally orc and human, aren't they? We do know that in the data there are at least two other decor styles, neutral and opulent, with that latter one certainly sounding a bit like it could possibly be more elven in style. If I had to guess at this stage, I'd say that the outside of the properties would in general be more in keeping with the themes of each neighbourhood, so a bit human-y or a bit orky, but with much more options for the inside. I think it will be possible for you to create your lush elven interior or your forsaken dungeon, just more so on the inside than the out. But I've already been very wrong about this player housing stuff, so maybe don't take what I predict too seriously from now on. On that note, this is not the end of the system. Obviously, the player housing system is evergreen, constantly being added to, constantly expanding, and the suggestion is that there will be new zones created for it in the future too, which makes sense. The obvious question is, when? Blizz fairly state that they want to keep the initial two as the only options for the foreseeable future to allow players to bed in and get comfy, get used to this new system and enjoy it before they even think about moving somewhere else, which would seem to rule out a new zone launching with midnight, wouldn't it? Which is understandable, but also a bit weird and kind of a waste, because that would be such an obvious time to launch a new zone. We know that Silvermoon is set to feature heavily in that expansion, to the extent that most of us think right now it will end up being the main expansion hub, and if not faction neutral, then definitely with faction neutral areas like Dalaran. And wouldn't it be a no-brainer to have a new faction neutral housing zone there? So already it's different from these first two zones and has a reason to exist, but also with a completely different aesthetic and style to those two existing zones, and extremely expansion relevant? It would seem by what Blizz is saying here that maybe that would be too soon. So maybe... Look, I made a joke earlier about not getting your Grizzly Hills home with this system, but don't forget, Last Titan is set on Northrend, so it would make perfect sense to add a new housing zone there too, and actually, you probably will be able to have a Grizzly Hills style thing going on, won't you? And lo, suddenly everyone is very excited about The Last Titan. And this leads us nicely to the speculation part of this segment, because I know that lots of you may be slightly disappointed by this announcement and the things that you now know player housing won't be. And I think that's perfectly fair. I think I had some of that myself, if only because we went from having literally anything possible to a much more specific vision. And obviously I wanted that specific vision, but a part of me can't help but mourn the things that are now off the table, even if I didn't particularly want them. But I am excited about what a neighborhood system offers players. And in particular, the line of the blue post where Blizz say, letting players live next to each other, work together, and share in the rewards of being part of the neighborhood. That gets me thinking, if Blizzard really is leaning into encouraging player interaction in these shards, what that could potentially look like. And I think it could look like plots in each neighborhood that aren't designated for individual homes, but public buildings that residents will vote for and contribute resources to, like the Broken Shore buildings or Siren Isle boss excavations, like libraries or parks or stables or town halls, which in a guild neighborhood would be de facto guild halls. Guild neighborhoods are already better than guild halls, but it would be extremely cool to have one in the neighborhood too. Why not? Maybe there will be seasonal vendors that visit, or events that encourage neighbors to come out of their homes and gather, like an ETC concert or Lawmaster Cho telling some stories. I think that kind of thing would be awesome, and it's thinking about that which makes me really excited about the future of this feature in a way I would not have imagined in my imagined version of housing that was completely different from this. At the end of the day, player housing doesn't make or break an MMO. If it did, WoW wouldn't be the most popular MMO of all time by definition, and WildStar probably would be. But I love the idea of having my own neighborhoods, my main being with my guildies, my alts probably being in a public neighborhood just to see the differences. I think it is something that WoW will be able to do really well, and which will be unique to this game in a really cool way. But what do you think? And this isn't just me doing an engagement thing here. Seriously, what do you think? Are Blizzard directly trying to take on 14 with this move? Does it really matter either way? And is this a player housing system that you can get on board with? What ideas do you have about what those rewards could be for everyone in neighborhoods? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work happen. And patrons, seriously, thank you. Because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evertel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Zenkai Goose. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evertel. Until next time, cheerio.